Welcome back. In tonight's episode, we're venturing into America's most beautiful wilderness areas, where something dark and deeply unsettling lurks beneath the surface of our most treasured national parks. These aren't your typical ghost stories or urban legends. These are documented, verified accounts of real events that shattered the peace of families seeking escape in nature, stories that make you question whether that isolated campsite is really as safe as it seems. So what happened in these pristine wilderness areas that millions visit each year for peace and recreation? Well, let's just say it's the kind of experience that makes you never want to camp alone again. These are true stories that prove sometimes the most beautiful places on Earth can harbor the most horrifying secrets. Tonight, we'll take you to 4 different national parks where ordinary camping trips became living nightmares. From California's majestic Yosemite to Virginia's serene Shenandoah, from Oklahoma's Girl Scout camps to Washington's remote Olympic Peninsula, we'll explore cases that remain etched in the memories of park rangers, investigators, and families who lived through unimaginable horror. Each story is different, but they all share something chilling in common. They happen to people just like you and me, people who thought they were safe in America's protected wilderness areas. People who discovered that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from wild animals or natural disasters, but from the evil that humans can carry into even the most sacred places. These parks are supposed to be our refuges from the world's chaos, places where families bond, where couples fall in love, where children experience wonder for the first time, but as you'll learn tonight, they can also become places where nightmares come true. Before we begin, a warning. These stories are not for the faint of heart. They involve real violence, real families destroyed, and real mysteries that haunted investigators for decades. Some cases remained unsolved for nearly 30 years before breakthroughs in DNA technology finally revealed the truth. So turn down the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for the most disturbing camping stories from America's national parks. Because after tonight, you'll never look at that peaceful campsite the same way again. Let's dive in. In February 1999, a mother and daughter from Eureka, California, were bubbling with excitement about their upcoming vacation to Yosemite National Park. Carol Sund, 42, her 15-year-old daughter Julie, and their Argentine exchange student friend Silvina Pelosso, 16, had planned the perfect winter getaway to one of America's most iconic destinations. Carol was a 4th-generation Californian who knew Yosemite like the back of her hand. She and her husband had even honeymooned there decades earlier. For young Silvina, this would be her first taste of America's natural wonders, the cultural experience she'd remember forever. Or so they thought. On February 14, 1999, the 3 women checked into the Cedar Lodge in El Portal, just outside Yosemite's western entrance. The rustic motel wasn't fancy, but it offered convenient access to the park and had a reputation as a safe, family-friendly place where tourists could rest between days of sightseeing. What none of them knew was that working at the Cedar Lodge was a handyman named Kerry Stainer. To guests, he seemed like a quiet, helpful employee who kept to himself. He'd been working there for 2 years, fixing things around the property, maintaining the grounds, always polite when spoken to. Just another face in the background of their vacation. But Kerry Stainer was harboring dark fantasies. For over a year, he'd been planning something horrific. And when he saw Carol, Julie, and Silvina check in that February evening, he knew he'd found his targets. On February 15th, the 3 women simply vanished. Their rental car, a bright red Pontiac Grand Prix, disappeared with them. When they failed to catch their flight home to San Francisco, Carol's husband Jens knew something was terribly wrong. Carol was organized, reliable, the kind of person who never missed flights or changed plans without calling. The FBI launched a massive search operation. For weeks, there were no clues, no witnesses, no trace of the 3 women or their vehicle. The case made national headlines as the search expanded across California. Family members appeared on television pleading for information. The nightmare stretched on day after day with no answers. Then, in March 1999, investigators made a gruesome discovery. The charred remains of the rental car were found deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Inside the trunk were 2 bodies, burned beyond recognition. Dental records confirmed the victims were Carol Sund and Silvina Pelosso. Both had been strangled and shot. Silvina had also been sexually assaulted, but where was Julie? A week later, the FBI received an anonymous letter containing a hand-drawn map. At the top, in crude handwriting, were the chilling words, "We had fun with this one." The map led investigators to a remote area near Dom Pedro Reservoir where they found Julie's body. She had been murdered and left in the wilderness like discarded trash. The community was horrified. 3 innocent women had come to experience the beauty of Yosemite and instead encountered pure evil. But the worst part? The killer was still out there. For months, the FBI pursued various suspects, local drug dealers, drifters, anyone who might have had opportunity. They arrested several men, but none of the evidence fit. The case seemed to be going cold. Then, in July 1999, the killer struck again. This time, the victim was Joa Armstrong, a 26-year-old naturalist who worked for the Yosemite Institute. She lived alone in a cabin near Yosemite Valley, helping visitors learn about the park's ecosystem. One morning, she was found decapitated outside her home. This time, there was a witness. Someone had seen a pale blue 1972 International Scout near Joa's cabin the night before. The vehicle belonged to Cary Stayner. When FBI agents tracked him down to a nudist colony in Northern California, Stayner seemed almost relieved. During questioning, he shocked investigators by confessing not just to Joa's murder, but to the killings of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina as well. The quiet handyman revealed that he had been planning the murders for over a year. He explained in cold, clinical detail how he had overpowered the 3 women at the Cedar Lodge, killed them, and disposed of their bodies. He showed no remorse, no emotion, just a matter-of-fact description of unspeakable acts. Cary Stayner was convicted and sentenced to death. He remains on death row to this day. But for the families of the victims and for the countless visitors who had stayed at Cedar Lodge, never knowing how close they came to encountering a monster, the horror of what happened there will never fade. The Cedar Lodge closed its doors permanently. The building still stands, a grim reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, even in the shadow of America's most beautiful wilderness. On a bright Sunday morning in May 1996, 2 young women loaded their backpacks and set off for what should have been a perfect camping trip in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park. Julie Williams, 24, and Lolly Winans, 26, were experienced outdoors enthusiasts who had met the previous year at a wilderness education program in Minnesota. Julie was a geologist with a bright future ahead of her, having just accepted a new job in Vermont's Lake Champlain region. Lolly was a free-spirited wilderness guide who loved nothing more than sharing her passion for nature with others. They were both intelligent, athletic, and deeply in love with each other and the great outdoors. Their golden retriever, Taj, bounded excitedly around their feet as they prepared for the multi-day hiking adventure through Shenandoah's scenic Blue Ridge Mountains. They had carefully planned their route, packed their gear, and informed their families of their expected return date. Everything seemed perfect. The couple chose to set up camp along the Bridle Trail, a peaceful spot near a babbling mountain stream. The location was secluded, but not completely isolated, just a quarter-mile from Skyline Drive and half a mile from the popular Skyland Resort. They followed all the backcountry regulations, camping away from designated trails as required, finding a quiet spot where they could enjoy nature's solitude. On their final evening alive, May 24th, 1996, Julie and Lolly were photographed at their campsite, smiling and relaxed. These would be the last pictures ever taken of them alive. The photos, later found in their camera, show 2 happy young women enjoying what they thought was just another beautiful night under the stars. But someone else was moving through those dark woods that night, someone who'd been watching, planning, waiting for the right opportunity. On the morning of May 31st, when Julie failed to return home as scheduled, her father, Tom Williams, contacted park rangers. The search began immediately. Rangers located the women's car in the Skyland area, but there was no sign of Julie and Lolly themselves. Then, on June honest, searchers found Taj wandering alone through the forest, his leash dragging behind him. The discovery of the dog sent chills through the search team. Experienced outdoors, people like Julie and Lolly would never let their beloved pet wander free unless something was terribly wrong. Later that same day, park rangers made the horrific discovery that would shock the nation. At their remote campsite, they found the bodies of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans. Both women had been bound and gagged. Their throats had been slashed. The scene suggested they had been attacked while sleeping in their tent, completely defenseless against their killer. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the LGBTQ+ community and the outdoor recreation world. Two young women who had done everything right, followed safety protocols, camped in a designated area, informed family of their plans, had still fallen victim to unspeakable violence in what was supposed to be a safe haven. The FBI launched a massive investigation, following thousands of leads over the years. In 2001, they arrested Darrell David Rice, a Maryland man who had attacked another woman in Shenandoah the previous year. Prosecutors alleged that Rice had targeted Julie and Lolly because of their sexual orientation, calling it a hate crime. But in 2004, charges were dropped when DNA evidence failed to link Rice to the murders. For 28 long years, the case remained unsolved. Julie's and Lolly's families lived with the agony of not knowing who had killed their daughters or why. The killer walked free, while two vibrant young lives remained nothing but memories and photographs. Then, in June 2024, breakthrough DNA technology finally provided the answer the families had been waiting for. Advanced genetic testing linked the murders to Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a convicted serial rapist from Ohio who had died in prison in 2018. Jackson was known to be an avid hiker who frequently visited Shenandoah National Park. The revelation brought some measure of closure to the families, but also raised disturbing questions. How many other victims might Jackson have claimed during his years of freedom? How many other families camping in remote areas had unknowingly crossed paths with this predator? FBI Special Agent Stanley Medor, who announced the breakthrough, emphasized that this was never a hate crime as originally suspected. Julie and Lolly weren't targeted because of who they loved. They were simply in the wrong place when a dangerous predator was hunting for victims. Their story serves as a sobering reminder that even in our most protected wilderness areas, evil can find a way in. Sometimes the greatest danger in the woods doesn't growl or have claws. Sometimes it walks on two legs and wears a human face. In the rolling Ozark Hills of eastern Oklahoma, nestled among 410 acres of pristine wilderness, stood Camp Scott, a summer paradise where Girl Scouts from across the region came to experience the magic of the outdoors. For decades, it had been a place of laughter, friendship, and innocent adventure. But in June 1977, it became the site of one of the most horrifying crimes in American camping history. On the evening of June 12th, 140 excited Girl Scouts arrived at Camp Scott for what was supposed to be 2 weeks of fun and learning. The camp was divided into multiple subcamps with Native American tribal names, each consisting of canvas tents on wooden platforms arranged around stone fire circles. The girls would sleep 4 to a tent, supervised by counselors who had their own nearby accommodations. 3 young campers, Lori Farmer, 8, Michelle Gousset, 9, and Doris Milner, 10, were assigned to Tent 8 in the Kiowa subcamp, the most isolated area of the facility. The Kiowa camp sat furthest west from the main trail, tucked away among dense trees that provided privacy but also isolation from the other camping areas. What none of the camp staff knew was that someone had been watching Camp Scott, studying its layout, learning its routines. 2 months earlier, during a staff training session, a counselor had found a disturbing handwritten note in her ransacked belongings. Written in crude capital letters, it read, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1. The camp director had dismissed it as a prank. The note was thrown away. No extra security measures were put in place. Life at Camp Scott continued as normal, and when the summer session began, no one remembered the ominous warning. On their first night at camp, the 3 girls in Tent 8 were excited and chatty, as children their age tend to be when experiencing the thrill of sleeping away from home. They whispered and giggled after lights out, sharing stories and snacks as new friendships began to form. But around 1:30 a.m., Counselor Carla Wilhite had to tell the girls to quiet down. As she walked back to her tent, she heard a strange, low, guttural sound coming from the forest behind the tents. When she shined her flashlight toward the noise, it stopped. Assuming it was just a wild animal, she went back to sleep. Throughout the night, other counselors reported hearing unusual sounds, the movement in the forest, strange noises that didn't quite sound animal or human. But in the wilderness of Oklahoma, odd sounds at night weren't uncommon. No one investigated further. When dawn broke on June 13th, Counselor Carla Wilhite began her morning rounds to wake the campers. As she approached Tent 8 in the Kiowa camp, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The tent appeared damaged, with what looked like dark stains on the canvas. Inside, she made the most horrific discovery imaginable. 8-year-old Lori Farmer was dead in her sleeping bag, her skull crushed. 9-year-old Michaela Gousset lay nearby, also beaten to death. 10-year-old Doris Milner was missing. In shock and panic, Wilhite ran to alert other staff members. A frantic search began for Doris, hoping against hope that she had somehow escaped and was hiding somewhere in the forest. But about 150 yards from the tent, searchers found her body near a tree. She too had been brutally murdered. The crime scene was beyond anything the local investigators had ever encountered. All 3 girls had been sexually assaulted. The killer had approached from behind the tent, unhooked the back flaps, and entered while the children slept. The attack was swift and savage. The girls likely never knew what hit them. Within hours, 140 terrified Girl Scouts were evacuated from Camp Scott as law enforcement swarmed the area. Parents rushed to collect their daughters, many of whom were traumatized by the sudden end to what should have been a magical summer experience. The investigation eventually focused on Gene Leroy Hart, a local Cherokee man with a history of violent crime who had escaped from prison the previous year. Physical evidence linked him to the scene, but when he was finally captured and tried, a jury acquitted him. Hart died in prison in 1979 while serving time for other offenses. For decades, questions remained about whether Hart was truly guilty or if the real killer had escaped justice. Finally, in 2019, advanced DNA testing provided a definitive answer. Hart was indeed the murderer. The testing eliminated other suspects while strongly confirming his involvement. Camp Scott never reopened. The grounds were abandoned, left to be reclaimed by the forest. Today, only crumbling foundations and rusted equipment remain, hidden among the trees like graves, markers for innocence lost. The Oklahoma Girl Scout murders remain one of the most shocking examples of how evil can invade even the safest, most innocent spaces. 3 little girls who went to sleep excited about 2 weeks of summer fun never woke up, and their deaths forever changed how Americans think about the safety of children's camps. In the misty, primeval forests of Washington's Olympic Peninsula lies one of America's most remote and mysterious national parks. Olympic National Park encompasses nearly 1 million acres of temperate rainforest, rugged coastline, and alpine wilderness so dense and isolated that portions remain unexplored even today. It's the kind of place where hikers can walk for days without seeing another human being, where ancient trees tower hundreds of feet overhead, and where the boundary between civilization and true wilderness blurs until it disappears entirely. But this vast isolation that makes Olympic so appealing to outdoor enthusiasts also makes it perfect for those with darker intentions. Since the park's establishment, dozens of people have vanished without a trace in its endless green maze. Most are assumed to have fallen victim to the harsh environment, hypothermia, bear attacks, or simply getting lost in terrain so dense that search teams can pass within feet of someone and never know they're there. However, some disappearances have a more sinister explanation. On June 24, 2006, Gilbert Gilman, a 47-year-old high-ranking state government official, set out alone for a day hike in Olympic National Park. Gilman was an experienced outdoorsman who knew the area well. He was also a decorated US Navy veteran and former paratrooper, not the type of person to take unnecessary risks or panic in emergency situations. Gilman parked his car at the Staircase Ranger Station and told park staff he planned to hike the Flapjack Lakes Trail, a popular but challenging route that winds deep into the Olympic Mountains. He was expected back by evening. When he failed to return, park rangers launched an immediate search. For days, teams scoured the trail and surrounding wilderness. They found no trace of Gilman, no clothing, no equipment, no sign that he had ever been there. It was as if he had simply vanished into the forest. His disappearance became one of Olympic National Park's most baffling unsolved cases. What investigators didn't know at the time was that Olympic National Park was the hunting ground of one of America's most methodical and terrifying serial killers. Israel Keyes was a name that would become synonymous with calculated evil. Unlike most serial killers who operate within a specific geographic area, Keyes traveled constantly across the United States, selecting victims at random and burying kill kits, caches of weapons, tools, and supplies in remote locations years before he planned to use them. Keyes was particularly drawn to national parks, wilderness areas, and campgrounds. He would scout potential hunting grounds during seemingly innocent camping trips, noting isolated trails, studying visitor patterns, and identifying locations where someone could disappear without being noticed. He chose victims who were alone, vulnerable, and unlikely to be missed quickly. In 2012, Keyes was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig in Anchorage, Alaska. During interrogation, FBI agents were stunned as he began confessing to murders across the country, spanning over a decade. He claimed to have killed at least 8 people, but investigators suspected the true number was much higher. Keyes revealed his methodology with chilling detail. He would bury kill kits containing weapons, zip ties, duct tape, and other supplies in remote wilderness areas across the continental United States. Years later, he would return to retrieve these caches and use them to abduct and murder random victims. The remote burial locations allowed him to commit crimes far from his home base, making it nearly impossible for investigators to connect him to the murders. Olympic National Park was one of his known hunting grounds. FBI agents confirmed that Keyes had made multiple trips to the Olympic Peninsula over the years, often camping alone in remote areas. His familiarity with the park's vast wilderness and his methodical approach to victim selection made him the perfect predator for such an isolated environment. When investigators began reviewing unsolved disappearances in areas where Keyes was known to have traveled, Gilbert Gilman's case immediately caught their attention. The timing, location, and circumstances all fit Keyes' pattern. Gilman was exactly the type of victim Keyes preferred, a lone hiker in a remote area where a disappearance could easily be attributed to natural causes. Before investigators could definitively link him to Gilman's disappearance or other Olympic National Park cases, Keyes committed suicide in his Alaska jail cell in December 2012. He took his secrets with him to the grave, leaving behind only crude drawings of skulls that he had made with his own blood, possibly representing the true number of his victims. The FBI continues to investigate potential Keyes victims across the country, but his suicide means that families like Gilbert Gilman's may never get the closure they deserve. Somewhere in the dark forests of Olympic National Park, answers lie buried as deep as Israel Keyes' kill kits, lost forever in the wilderness that both conceals and remembers its secrets. Today, when hikers venture alone into Olympic's remote backcountry, they walk the same trails where a methodical killer once hunted human prey. The ancient forests keep their silence, holding the memories of those who entered but never returned, their stories lost somewhere between the towering trees and the endless sky.